welcome. Thank you for joining us for season 2 of Investing for Impact. We are here at episode 5 with the lovely Dr. Beatrice Murage, who is a medical doctor, a certified project management professional with an international MBA and Masters in Business Analytics and Big Data, and also currently works for Philips and is one of the Vilgro board members. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. and for all the information that you're going to share with us. So today we are going to be discussing about investments and especially investments in female-led enterprises. And I am your host, you've heard me before, Francisca Zanga from Vilgro Africa. So Beatrice, karibu.
Asante, Francisca.
Yes.
It's good to finally get to do this after a while of back and forth. So thanks for the invitation.
And thank you for joining us all the way from Amsterdam. You're here in Nairobi and it's really good. At least now we're able to meet face to face and have this discussion. So this is lovely.
Yeah, I think it's just serendipity and this is when it was meant to happen. It's always good to be home. I mean, in every way, what we do in terms of my work and even just the areas of passion really tie in to what happens here in Kenya and just our countries generally in the global south, so to speak. So it's good to be home always. Yeah. But Amsterdam is an interestingly lovely city. It has its ups and downs. Currently, I hear it's very hot. There was a heat wave, I think 42 degrees, if I'm not wrong.
Wow.
But it's a beautiful city. It has a different vibe of its own, a melting pot for different cultures, different people. There's a lot to learn from the city, from its history, from the people who live there, and just a lot to also give. So I have enjoyed my stay there so far, and I hope I'll continue to enjoy it.
That's amazing. Wonderful stuff there. Why don't you tell us a bit about the work that you do with Philips while at Amsterdam and also the work that you've been doing even for the board as well?
So those two things are very much related. Currently, who am I? If someone asks you, Beatrice, who are you? I'm a healthcare, let's say, explorer, just a systems explorer in that sense, very passionate about how you create impact to improve lives. And in my case, one of the drivers, one of the channels that I've been lucky, and I guess I keep saying that, very privileged to be part of is the healthcare piece. But I've also worked with the agricultural and education sector to just get to see how you bring together the different social arms to just create impact in ways that are sustainable. When we talk about sustainability, it touches a lot of things. Currently, I'm based in Royal Philips. Core team, the group sustainability at the global level. One of the programs that the team there works on is called the Access to Care program. Philips, as a global company, has made a commitment, would like to improve the lives of 400 million people in the underserved communities by 2030. Now, that's a very ambitious goal. Yeah. And I think Philips has really been up to the task to put them, what do you call it, the money where their mouths are in terms of just getting to explore what that looks like, working on initiatives as the businesses, as the markets, as the different function teams that are within the commercial entity, just how you push that needle forward towards meeting that target. The other thing that's related to that particular target is that you have the commercial entity that is Royal Philips that have run. I think in Kenya it's a brand that's very famous. Then you do have the foundation side of Philips, so that's Philips Foundation, but it's a separate entity in that sense. But I know Vilgro has interactions with the foundation in many ways because of this issue we call impact investment. Yeah. But at the end of the day, both my team, the Access to Care global team, and the Philips Foundation are looking at how we can work with stakeholders, even like Vilgro, to just unpack this piece. How do we get to impacting the lives of 400 million people in underserved communities globally by 2030? So that's in a big nutshell how my work impacts or touches upon what Vilgro does. But beyond that, when you're talking about entrepreneurship, when you're talking about investment, it's another part of what is really important to me and what I've also had the privilege to contribute to. So I've worked as part of a startup before, got to see how you build a team, how you you understand what it's like to build a value proposition, to just grapple with the questions around business modeling, just gaining legitimacy, especially in healthcare, because it's a very highly regulated space. And then, of course, you're talking about life and death situations in many cases as well. So just getting to see what does an entrepreneurial process look like there. And then also working with women who are young, women social entrepreneurs. I had the honor of serving on their board a while back, and the advisory board, the Kenyan branch of it, and just getting to work with a lot of female funders. And there the scope was not necessarily healthcare, but just as being women and you're running businesses. I mean, in our community, our mothers, our grandmothers, we speak of entrepreneurship today, but it's in the fabric of the nation. Whether it's running a shop or even just running something. The people, when you're talking about impact investment or even financing, pulling financing, we've always heard of Jamas, the revolving fund. So the concepts are not new. The idea is to get to see what is the vocabulary that's applied. It's a bit more structural. It's becoming a bigger, or rather a more global discussion. And I think I'm really happy to have this discussion today to see, do we have, let's say, the tools and the language and the understanding to have this conversation at the let's say the national, international tables, so that you're able to just leverage those pieces and bring them to bear for concepts we've known for a very long time as Kenyans and just even as female entrepreneurs and investors in the space.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And it's clear that you've had a lot of experience, both from the investment side and also from the startup angle as well, having run your own startup, having even sat on a board for various female startups. What would you say are some of the key challenges or the challenges and also mistakes that female-led enterprises make that impact their ability to raise investment?
I'll start with what they do well. Just from what I've observed, female, let's say, founders or female entrepreneurs do well. There's a very strong sense of, let's say, just rooting in impact. Now, I know nowadays impact investment has become common lingo in a sense. It wasn't a while back. But for the female founders that have been able to just interact with, impact was important to them. And I think that was very interesting also in influencing the kind of sectors that get into, the kind of businesses that be running, just getting to see that there's an impact either on the quality of lives that people live, impact on just how businesses run, impact around, trying to run an ethical entity. So those are things that are very important for female founders. That's a good thing on the one side.
Absolutely.
The places where I saw it created some challenges, twofold. One was when we didn't have an equal focus on, let's say, the business aspects of it. So the business model, how you're going to generate your revenues, how do you just work on your costs. So that very hardcore, let's say, revenue focus, or even if we call it as it is, if it's a profit-making, let's say, startup or entities, that just having your P&L focus in place. That is something several female founders were shy or maybe not very aggressive about initially. That has changed over time because you need to be able to balance the resources, or even, let's say, your revenues, or what you call your P&L view, with the impact that you create, because then the issues around the finances also impact how sustainable you will be as a business, so that you can continue creating the impact. So that was one. The other piece was also there wasn't a lot of, let's say, awareness or just the funds that focused on empowering and tooling female founders as much as we have today. So I think just that support, because especially when you're starting a business, there's need to just get the different pieces in place. So the actual proposition, what value are you bringing with whatever it is that you want to do? The pieces of getting to understand are these pain points that I'm seeing, or I'm thinking I'm solving, the actual pain points in the market, or that does my solution then meet those pain points? And then you get to the point of now starting to negotiate for how do we even resource this dream of this vision that we have to solve this problem. Because then when you start talking about the resourcing you really need to unpack it, and then most of them did not have a clear understanding at the beginning, but that has really changed with time. And I say we are much better today than we were before. And that learning curve and even just that exposure curve has been very good, at least, especially in the recent past. And I hope we can go further and get to a place where we don't need to have this discussion.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true, and that is the whole reason why we're creating a lot of these sessions and having this podcast, just to be able to reach a point where we're not seeing a difference between how female-led enterprises are performing versus male-led enterprises. It becomes less about the gender and more about the actual work that they're doing. But I want to take a step back a bit to what you said about the P&Ls and their business strategies, and also about measuring the problem solution fit that they have. And typically those are not unique to just women. Most founders, as they're starting off, they will still need to figure out the P&L and the business model. So I'm wondering why it tends to have a bigger impact on female-led enterprises than the male-led enterprises. Why does it become a persistent problem more for these female-led enterprises?
Now, let me speak as a member of the advisory board at Vilgro, and just from the experience we had before, just working with female funders. One of the things is just getting to see impact investment has picked up, let's say, pace recently. Before, investment had different focus, maybe especially the high risk, high return area, and probably needed a lot of upfront, let's say, investment, and even the kind of industries. Healthcare has really seen a spike in investment. That was not the case before. People used to think it's a social thing for donor space or government only, not a place even private investors look at, whatever level or type or category of investors are. But that is changing.
Especially the pandemic. Yeah?
Yes, and that's because, and that's for two things, especially when you're looking at the healthcare of a people. The thought that you could be thinking about what investment or what the field of investment has built a reputation to do, that is create or just benefit and most profit for what you can get. That felt like it was a bit ethically mismatched with what healthcare should be doing. What I should be focusing on if I'm doing healthcare is how we keep people healthy, how we keep the healthcare costs down, how we keep the pricing as close to affordable, if not even probably no charging to the patients. So just those ethical push and pull pieces of the business speak versus the what do you call it? I've lost my train of thought.
The business speak versus the foundation, impact, the social side of it?
Between the business speak and the I think the foundation of what healthcare is about, the practice of medicine and everything around healthcare as well. There seemed to be a clash. But now, as we're going ahead, getting to look at impact, where traditionally, or rather historically, a lot more female founders have built their businesses around, maybe out of choice, out of just that matching with values, there's now better funding than there was before. So in that sense, you will see that as you're looking, you're going to have more female founders and captured in that pool than we did before. And then, of course, you're also having more people going into entrepreneurship now. Whether they think it's a fancy idea or a really awesome, cool thing to do. Like I have a lot of my colleagues in the healthcare industry, even medics to be very specific, who are also thinking of how do you affect the healthcare system? How do you contribute more than just being a practitioner? Can I look at different elements that I can give a full solution? And that is causing just that growth of entrepreneurship. And I think also having a fostering environment when you're looking at government policy, when you're looking at just that environment that allows for you to explore, that allows for you, to just get to see how you contribute to the solution, whether you're a small, middle enterprise or even a larger one. Yeah. And then getting to see how the financing flows around that. As long as at the end of the day, we all need to keep remembering, especially for healthcare, it's about the patient. It should be about the patient and then being able to have affordable access to healthcare.
Absolutely. You're spot on there. And as you rightfully said, there has seen an increase in investments, an increase in support that is going out, especially to female-led enterprises. However, it's not yet 50-50. There's still a very small percentage, even though it has increased over the years, it's a very small percentage of that is what that goes to female-led enterprises. Why do you think that despite all the growth that has been in the sector, female founders are still struggling to raise investments?
I wouldn't say even the 50-50 is a goal, really. Because then, I mean, if there's possibility to grow beyond that, why not? I think one of the things that we're struggling is that when you're coming to engage an investor, it depends. Are you looking for an angel investor? That conversation will be different. If you're looking for, let's say, your impact investment funds that you have really growing today, that's a different conversation. If you're talking to a private equity or a venture capital, let's say, team, that's a very different conversation. The incentives are different. So one of the things I think has been a challenge, and not just for female founders, let me be honest, a bit maybe more so for them, but even for the male founders, is how do you even interact or engage with an investor? Where do you even start? What do you say? How do you structure this pitch? What are they interested in? What do deals look like when you structure them? How are these deals, are they even well equipped with the information to be able to even negotiate for structures in the deals that are mutually benefiting? And then do you even understand the lingo in this space? So those are the questions that we've not fully seen answered even from the side of the founders. And I think when you don't have a better awareness of these kinds of issues, then it's a bit harder to negotiate. So either you don't start the conversation or it doesn't succeed. And then you continue propagating that vicious cycle whereby the founder does not get to attract enough funding or a fair stake or even just a sort of fair discussion when you're negotiating for investment funds.
Yes. And what are some of so what would you recommend in terms of increasing that awareness, increasing that space for that dialogue to happen?
I've seen a couple of things that, let me use two examples. One is, of course, the Vilgrow team.
Yeah,
what they've been doing, and allow me to also use an example of the Phillips Foundation, because they recently launched an impact investment fund. And what are they doing to sort of remedy that? At least is one just being cognizant that we need to have female founders as part of the pool. Because I mean, part of what investment funds do sometimes is even just developing that pipeline. And that involves a lot of looking, a lot of assessment, getting to check fit. But it's just also being aware that when I'm doing my pipeline development, the kinds of startups I'm looking at, am I having any that are female founded or female led? And it's not just on that merit, on that purview alone that they have female founders, but they're also doing their work well. So all factors holding, or even just the core factors holding, are we aware as an investment team of how many female-led, let's say, businesses we're looking into or startups we're working into? So it needs to be an awareness thing. It needs to be a deliberate choice. Some teams probably are even looking at, can we even put specific targets that we have in terms of the kind of female-funded startups that we want to be working with. So there's that deliberate effort, and then also equipping. When you're going through that pipeline development, or even just the interaction, the kind of questions that you probe that founder about, the kinds of things that you're asking for, that's a bit of also, they grow with the process as they go along with you. But then also getting to do that in a way that is also empowering for the founders, which is always an interesting balance. Because I mean, I'm also trying to get a good deal for myself, but then can we strengthen that? The other thing is also having impact investment funders being part of communities that are just creating general awareness in the entrepreneurial space, whether you're male or female, that generally just some education of entrepreneurs. What does investment funding mean? What does this space look like? What are the options available? How can you negotiate better? And I think also, even when we're looking at some of our formal school and our formal courses, just being able to avail that, even if it's through your online pieces, just create that awareness and education. The other thing is also getting to see, especially for serial entrepreneurs who've sort of built their stripes, or rather earned their stripes in the market, just being very deliberate to mentor specific entrepreneurs, whether they're male, but even more so female, because they're different. When you're pitching an idea, investors don't really invest just in the idea and the potential for revenue or just great business models. Actually, sometimes it's a team. When I went to school for my MBA, and I got to and I was part of an entrepreneurial track and class, and I kept hearing that most investors were willing to invest in the ideas, but with an A team, because the ideas evolve.
Exactly.
But when you have great team chemistry and you're able to actually choose a really great team, then they can be able to just pick that idea, be able to evolve with it and deliver something amazing. So there are all those pieces. There's the formal process, the informal process, what's mentorship, what's actually in the learning. And I think just creating a general awareness that we need to talk about this and do something about it.
Absolutely. I like what you're saying there. And especially around the team, one thing we've seen a lot in Vilgro is that it pays to have a team which is coachable.
True.
By the time you're coming to the investor, you still don't have your idea or your business fully thought out. As you mentioned rightfully, it will morph and grow over time. But if you're not coachable, then the investor can help you get to that level, can't give you that guidance and mentorship that you need to grow your business further. So being coachable as well, in addition to the idea, is very important. As you said, in fact, even sometimes more so if you have an A team behind you. And I especially like what you're saying about creating more awareness. I know one of the things we're exploring with season 3 is, can we now be giving information around fundraising? So I hope you'll be joining us for that season as well. But yes, so I want to dive a little deeper into something you mentioned about investors being intentional with their portfolio and seeing how many female-led enterprises do they have in their portfolio. And one of the things that we've heard, especially even during this season, is that the investment teams themselves, investment committees, might not even have female investors within that pool, within that committee or that panel. And that will also be a hindrance in terms of how they view investments coming in, because then you're not getting insight, the 360 insight from both perspectives. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. Is that something that you think does impact the amount of investment that goes into female-led enterprises? And if so, how can we as investors change that going forward?
Whether it does impact or not, I think when you mention impact, then my research side kicks in. You're like, I'd like to see this data and actual research on the actual impact of that. Influence, yes. Influence, yes. Because then you don't only just need to have female founders who are aware about it, but even at the decision-making level of the investment, let's say teams, the committees that they put together, it does bring a different view when you do have, let's say, female business people or even just female representation at that level. And that is just being able to challenge things a bit differently, to maybe even just nudge you towards a different view. Of course, every idea at the end of the day will need to go through the objective set criteria, because most investment funds or investment teams have a criteria they follow in making the decisions regarding investment. But just having that view at that level, or even getting to see, can you note how we have a lot of female founders who come through, just getting to note what's generally the success rate to getting funded, and if none, are there things that we can actually do about it, even in terms of even just going back into that body of knowledge in the industry to train more on what to look at. It does matter. It does matter in that sense. But I also must say, apart from having female representation, even the men who sit in these committees, having men with that radar, just that awareness that you have female founders, or there are females who are actually leading businesses in the industry, that allyship or lobbying from their end is also very important, because then it's not just been looked at from just how you are, or whether you're a female or male, or how you identify being the the reason that you get investment funding. But let's not forget, at the end of the day, when you look at the market forces, when you look at the market factors, it's an idea that works that will prevail. Now, if that happens to be more with the female-led businesses, then it's only fair that you actually do invest in that. Yeah. So there are many things in play. It's not just a female or non-female discussion. There are many elements in play that we need to examine, to be aware of, and to just also support as well. Because you could have maybe a business that's female-led, but in that, let's say, leadership team is still very largely male, or a male-led business that in the leadership team is largely female. So there are very many dynamics we're looking at. So the idea would be to see, is that really the issue? Are we looking to just have a balanced view at the leadership of a startup level? Yeah,
Absolutely. And so speaking about even the support that has been given, what are some of the steps you've taken to balance the number of investments made to female-led ventures?
At least within the investment, or rather the advisory board of Velgro Africa, I do know, or my picking from the team is that there's just that sensitivity around that. Can we also have as much balance on just the people that are applying for the funding as possible? Now, ties back to the earlier question on the challenge. If our female-led businesses don't apply for funding, you never even make it into the running for consideration. So that's one thing. Just have the courage to apply. Yeah, so that you're even considered. So when they are there, and of course, even looking at the ideas that their startups and what they're working on, there's that awareness, to also offer that support through and through. Not less, not more, but at least at par with the other founders who are in that investment team. So I know there's that radar in place. Some investment teams also institutionalize that process to actually have very specific processes that target different kind of founders. Either they feel are not well represented traditionally in their pool of investees, so to speak, and how they can strengthen that. But I'm seeing at least there's that shift of awareness, which was really not as high a while back. Yeah.
And do you have any additional advice or suggestions you'd give to investors in terms of increasing their portfolio, the number of female-led enterprises within their portfolio?
I think it's to be deliberate. What has started is a goodwill thing, to be deliberate. How they want to implement it is up to them, because I think every investment funds also has a responsibility, and I think there's a way it's structured with its boundaries. But at least, even especially in just seeking out these entrepreneurs and the people who do the search for who even makes it to our list of analysis for who we're going to fund, be deliberate to include female-founded businesses, female-led businesses, or largely female leadership team sort of startups as well. And that needs to be a deliberate point. The other thing is also getting to see, how does this investment community feed back into the ecosystem by just mentoring, however they do it, mentoring more of founders, especially the female founders, on how you engage with investment, let's say teams. What do they look for? How do you prepare? How does that become part of what you do as a business?
And I'm curious to think why that isn't already happening. What do you think are some of the myths that investors have around investing in female-led enterprises?
Yeah, one of the myths I've heard a lot is that investment finance, or rather just the finance field, is a boys' club. We hear that a lot. Maybe it's because just out of choice and interest, it's mostly men who've been in this industry. And I think, of course, I've built networks over time. So it's a boys' club that no woman is allowed into. And I don't think that's entirely true. Based on just what you have to offer. And if you can actually just bring forth what you do have, and just getting to see how you even leverage quote unquote boys club to actually get to be an advocate of what you do, is there's a way you can start unpacking that myth, and also just where it holds true, in context where it holds true, to just start changing that. So that's one of the main things we got to really hear from some of the female founders that we worked with. That's one. The second myth is that investment teams will just come and completely change everything that you're doing, bulldoze your business, and just run you out of your own company, which is not always the case. Really, that's not the standard thing. That comes and ties in with how are you structuring your deal? What are you looking for in terms of your investment funding? What have you agreed to in terms of terms around the, let's say, the stakes, the governance structure, things like those, and how does it evolve over the time? So some people hear investment, they're like, no, I'd rather bootstrap. I never want to hear about investment teams or investment funding, which is not always the case. So those are the two main ones that I've heard. There've been some cases where they've held true. There've been cases where they don't hold true. So the idea is just get to seeing how do you scale that obstacle and get to a place whereby you can also benefit as a founder.
Absolutely. And it does also tie into your earlier point about even creating more awareness, because it's through that awareness then these fears around what you've mentioned will not necessarily be there, because they've already created an understanding of what the investment space is all about.
There's also an industry move around this discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So just getting to ensure where you get to a place where there's too much heavy leaning. You'll go to some places, they're like, they're only women. Yeah, it's also not balanced. They're not enough men. And I mean, that's fair enough. The aim here is balance. It's getting to see just that industry discussion around DEI. How do you even get just the female founders to also grow in terms of just how do you advocate for yourself or for your teams, if it's mostly female-led, such that there is that sense of equity, and inclusion, especially the inclusion. Diversity is great, having many different people on a team, just the different, beliefs and different cultures, that diversity piece, that's great. But I think the rubber meets the road at the point of inclusion. Inclusion at decision-making level, inclusion at the decision-making in terms of do they get the funding or not? And even inclusion in terms of just being able to equip the person so that they can actually get to the level where they get to. And inclusion, because a lot of female founders also really know their game. In fact, they're excellent at it. That then there is equity in that funds allocation, because sometimes it's merit and I'll bring the merit, but then there's still, the allocation is not as equitable as it should be. So there's that discussion that goes on. There's the equipping, because at the end of the day, you need to have merit in terms of the solution that you do give. And then there's a piece of how then do you create balance, that you have good businesses not being thrown away just because they have a largely female-led, let's say, team or even founder.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are some of the things female founders can do to not only find that funding, but push the investment space in the right direction?
I think when you've even grown as a founder, grow others. Grow other founders, both female and male. Because if you grow the female, then they're able to see this is how you negotiate in this space. This is what you do. This is how you run a business that works and successful. These are the elements. This is a process. Then feel free to adjust as your market adjusts. But then also male founders, getting also to influence how they do their business, but even how their worldview is like when they're also dealing with female-led businesses. It's important that there's balance in both ways, that you have a view that's good. Because even when you're mentoring your female founders, it's not telling them, all male teams now is a definite. No, it's just how do you communicate? Yeah. How do you negotiate? It's different depending on your audience and depending on the kind of person that you're talking to. And some of these things you learn with experience. And I think even getting to a place, these founders also, maybe if they're interested, get into the investment space as well, grow these funds, maybe also focus on just strengthening, female founders, or even just closing the gap where we're seeing it. But I think it's just that multiple or multifaceted effort, both by the male and the female side of the story.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. And that's one of the things why we've also been pushing for peer learning sessions when here at Vilgrow, to give other successful startups the opportunity to share learnings and give that mentorship and guidance to other startups which are coming up as well. So we'll often even invite those who have exited from our incubation programs to come back and speak to the new startups that have just joined our portfolio. Yeah, so I agree that they're 100%. And perhaps to as we sum up the call, right? And as we sum up this discussion, what we've been talking about creating awareness and sharing insights. So what would you say investors look for when they're looking to invest in a startup?
So there are 4 things that are usually more or less standard. Would look at what's our strategy as an investment team or as an investment fund. What's our strategy, priority, what is our strategy focus area, and then examine the venture or examine, let's say, the business that has submitted its proposal. Is there a fit? There needs to be a strategic fit, because if it doesn't exist, then it's going to be a bit hard for us to work together. Then there is that bit in terms of how do you structure the deal? Does it work again for the strategic priorities and even the main aims of this particular investment funds? Some of them could be high-risk investment, maybe high-risk return. So you're willing to possibly lose a lot of money. But for the one that does work, then you're probably going to win big. For some people, they want to distribute their risk a bit differently. So what's the risk profile or the risk appetite, for example, for this investor? And then tying in to the kind of risk profile that the venture has. So those are elements that more or less go across, the entire spectrum of the investors that you're looking at. Let me anchor into an example. Again, Philips Foundation, because of their impact investment, an example. They will look mostly at 5 things. They have, let's say, a 5-point criteria that they have for anyone who would like to probably be considered for impact investment by them. One of them is just that technology and expertise. I mean, Philips is generally a technology company. So just getting to see, does that fit with where we're going? So of course, it needs to be healthcare, because that's the focus point. There's just that strategy build. But what's the technology and what's the expertise that we're looking at? So they don't look at, they're more interested, let's say, in where the concept has been explored. There's potential for success and a need for, let's say, growth or acceleration. Vilgrow, for example, looks at a profile that's a bit earlier than the foundation. Vilgrow is willing to discuss early stage, which is much higher risk. But they're willing to actually, that's a risk appetite that they're comfortable with. So that's one thing. What's the technology? What's the expertise? And does it tie in to that risk willingness that we are open to as an investment team? The other bit is in terms of impact and scalability. It needing to tie in to that 400 million lives improved for the underserved by 2030. That is the corporate goal of Philips, and the Philips Foundation is affiliated to Philips. Then whatever it is that this particular team or startup is working on needs to contribute to that impact. And of course, we'd like to see scale. We don't want to invest as Philips, not just the foundation, but generally in efforts that, that will not grow or scale. So scale is important. Then there's a bit about the sustainability, whether it will last over time, but even sustainability elements, because even at group sustainability, we are concerned about things like carbon emissions, even just, what's the footprint in terms of how you affect the climate in how you do your work. So those elements of sustainability, not just in the provision of care, as let's say a healthcare startup, but just those other elements. How are you caring for the planet? How are you caring for the climate discussion, even in how you do your business? Then there's a bit about the ecosystem. Both Philips and Philips Foundation are aware that for you to reach this goal for the underserved, it's not a silver bullet, let's say, a scenario in terms of the solution, and it's not a one-person show or one organization show. You need to work with the ecosystem. And then it's just getting to see, if I look at this startup, Is that something that's part of what they do as their core work, or is it something they're even open to doing? Are they even aware that there are ecosystem factors in play, and how are they interacting with that? Then there's a bit in terms of the team. Always, what kind of team are we working with? What's their track record? What do they have a leadership team in place? What's the succession? That it's not a one-person shop, but or it doesn't just depend on one person, but it can survive beyond just individuals. What does that look like? We were looking at who else is probably looking at this company, because then it's a signal that maybe there's something they're onto that different people who are peers of the investment funds also find interesting. So if, let's say, if I come and I see, okay, fine. If I look at it, Bill Africa said, okay, this could be interesting. Maybe a different fund that's similar to Vilgro, or if Philips Foundation looked at it and a different fund to it looked at it, and then the teams can say there's something interesting here. It's easier to just work on that, let's say, growing or just incremental effect of just that confidence in the investor space. And sometimes you just need a really brave investor to just run with the risk. And then maybe once it's proved, so probably they get most of that benefit, or they open the opportunity for much more funding to happen. So those are some of the elements that, for example, they look like the expertise, the technology, the impact, scalability, the sustainability aspect, ecosystem, and even the team. But that's just the example for one of them. If I look at at the Philips side of things, they even have there was a ventures team, and they looked at how do we even assess different investments as well. So there's always a criteria in place, and then you need to assess, of course, then grade it, and then get to see, do you want to take this risk or not? But there's a due process in place. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I like what you're saying also about the investors looking at what others are doing. I know at Vilgro, we've prided ourselves a lot in being the first investment in, but then we don't go in with just investment through the incubation. We work with the companies to grow, and very much into the items that you talked about in terms of the sustainability, the growth strategy, to get them to a point that now they can even attract through the investment readiness training, they can even attract under other investors, and also why there's opportunities where we've worked even with the Philips Foundation and certain startups as well. But any last thoughts or feedback maybe you have, or words of wisdom for female-led enterprises out there?
I think for me, again, just as a member of the advisory board for Vilgro Africa, it's just apply for this funding. There's a place you start, equip yourself, and apply. And I think also it's also a parting shot to the advisory team at Vilgro, and even just especially the investment committee, to keep aware and just be cognizant the fact that there are female-founded businesses that do meet the criteria, in fact, even exceed the criteria that the investment committee is looking into in terms of who to invest in. So it's let's say a call of action on both ends. At least just even throw your heart in the ring. If you don't apply, you don't even get a shot. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, they say. Yeah? So take that shot, apply, start somewhere. If you get rejected, if there's a way to even just learn what could I have done better, keep with the process, be resilient, and then improve it. And then I think on the side now, for where the people are assessing these applications, is expand your radar. Expand your radar in terms of the profiles you're looking for, especially in that aspect of the team pillar. Because when people are looking at the team, can you start looking at, is this team balanced? Yeah. Track record is great as well. If it's balanced in terms of just the kind of faces I'm seeing around this slide, if they all look one way, either they're all women or all men or all however people identify, if it's just a very, one-way sort of team, then there's an issue. We're going to miss the views from the other voices that need to be represented at that team. But then, of course, with the capability, or rather the capacity or willingness to actually grow the capacity to deliver excellent results. Because at the end of the day, as much as we make, as much as we create awareness on the constitution of the team, and whether they're male-led, female-led, or however you want to define the leadership, you're still going to go to the real litmus test, and that is the market. Mm-hmm. And the market will always look at, what do you offer? Yeah, does it solve my problem in a way that I can afford? Then that is going to fly. So always prepare all these teams to tie, or rather, tap into the value proposition and have a solution that actually meets a pain point in the market.
And also remembering that the market is diverse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. This has been amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Beatrice, for joining us today. It's been a great discussion. I'm sure the listeners have enjoyed it as well. So thank you for joining us for episode 5, the last episode of this season. Unfortunately, I wish we could go on and meet. We've met so many great people, yourself included. I wish we could go on, but all good things come to an end, as they say, right? So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you in subsequent sessions as well.
Thank you so much for having me and for the invitation.
Yes.